So what makes a good character? Well, for the purpose of this video, a good character will be a character that either does one thing better than most or all other characters, or a character that does many different things all really well, and all of those things are also really important. And Ren basically checks all of these boxes. And I'm going to start with just a very quick rundown. Ren is a void debuffer, and her main gimmick is that when she uses her skill, she applies wound to up to 3 targets. And then when you attack a target that has wound on it, then Ren will gain a stack of magic, and when she has 5 stacks of magic, she will use a follow-up attack against the current target that you have selected, and this will be a proximity attack hitting up to 3 targets, which will also apply a defense down debuff that stacks. And then when she uses her special, she will then also apply a damage taken increase debuff to the enemy. That's basically her entire kit. That's all she does, which does not sound like a lot. It sounds very innocent, but the devil is in both the numbers and in everything that comes from this very simple sounding kit. So let's start with the damage amplification. Of course, a debuffer, for the most part, the main idea behind them is that they increase the amount of damage that you do to the enemy, right? So a debuffer in this case is someone who wants to have the highest number for the damage amplification that arises from both their defense down, the damage taken, increased debuff, etc. And Ren has a 10% defense down when she uses her skill, and she has an up to 20% defense down that stacks from her follow-up attacks, and then on top of that she has an up to 40% damage taken increased debuff from her special. Are those numbers good? Well, here's the thing about defense. So the way damage increase from defense down works is that when you apply a defense down to an enemy, let's say for example 30%, then their defense drops down to 70% of what it was originally. Now the actual original number, we don't care about that. We're gonna worry only about fractions and percentages here. So when the enemy defense drops from 100% to 70%, we can then calculate the damage increase by doing just 1 over 70%, which is about 43%, right? So a 30% defense down is about 43% damage increase. Now there's something weird that happens here because Ren has 2 defense debuffs, one that's 10%, the other that's up to 20%, and they don't actually just combine additively to 30%, which is what I originally thought. In fact, what happens first is the 10% gets calculated, so it drops to 90%, and then it drops to another 20% from that 90%, which actually doesn't drop to 70%, it drops to 72%, which is about a 39% damage increase. So let's just say the total damage increase from her defense down is 39%, okay? Then we look at her damage taken increase from her special, which is multiplicative, which means that in this case, at special level 4, which is what you would be at Ascension 0, you get another 30% damage taken increase. That's about 85% total damage increase that you get against the target if it has all of Ren's debuff on it. A lot of maths, I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to shortcut the math from now on. I just wanted to do it once so you get at least an understanding of what is happening. So 85% damage increase that you get against the target if Ren has all the debuffs on the enemy. And this is not just against one enemy, this is actually against 3 enemies. And this is at Ascension 0 if you have a fresh Ren from the gacha. How good is this? It's actually pretty darn good. But before I compare it to other characters, I also need to mention that yes, damage increase usually goes up with Ascensions. You have on one hand some debuffers that gain more damage taken increase from the special level itself. Like if the special level goes from 4 all the way up to 10, that might increase the damage depending on what the special does. And on Ascension 4, you gain an extra 30% more powerful debuffs, which of course also raises all these numbers. So I can tell you right now that Ascension 0 renders 85% damage taken increase, but at Ascension 5 goes all the way up to 137% damage taken increase on up to 3 targets with just 1 skill, and then the defense down debuffs from the follow-ups, and then of course the special. Nice. Let's compare that. Halloween Mummy just released, and Halloween Mummy against a single target at Ascension 0 is about 134%, which is less than Ascension 5 then of course, but at Ascension 5 it goes all the way up to 200%, by the way, like damage bonus that Halloween Mummy gives you against a single target, which that's a pretty high number. But if we go down the list, the numbers become a lot lower. So Swimsuit Sayaka at Ascension 0 does 43%, and at Ascension 5, 64% damage increase. I'm giving you the total numbers now. Nemu, on a non-forest ally that you're supporting, increases damage at Ascension 0 only by 37.5%. and if they are forest, then it's at least 75%, okay? And Ascension 5 goes all the way up to 98% for a non-forest ally that you're supporting. And if it is a forest ally you're supporting, it actually goes to 167% bonus damage taken. So that's pretty darn good. I'm factoring in the poison damage bonus as well, by the way. Then for Tsukasa doesn't look that bad, right? Well, what she does is at Ascension 0, she gives you a 64% damage taken increase against a target if the person you're supporting is not light or dark. And then if the person you're supporting is light or dark, I'm saying the person you're supporting as in the attacker that's standing next to the debuff that's attacking the enemy. If that attacker is either light or dark, then you get an 86% damage taken increase at A0. What about Ascension 5, right? Those numbers are gonna go way higher. Well, at Ascension 5, for a non-light and dark attacker, that's 96% damage taken increase, and for light and dark attacker, that's 128% damage increase. We're still not at Ren levels. Huh, that's kind of weird. Like, Nemu needed to support a forest character with poison on the enemy to get more damage taken increase than Ren does just like that. So, that's okay. Well, there's still Felicia, right? Felicia also increases some damage, right? Well, Felicia only gives you 43% damage taken increase at Ascension 0 and 85% at Ascension 5. Okay, that doesn't really do that much. So if we look at the numbers, we compare, hey, an Ascension 5 Ren actually has the third highest number, and the only other numbers that are higher is Nemu specifically supporting a forest target with poison currently on the enemy, and Halloween Mummy with Curse currently being on the enemy at Ascension 5, and that's quite a lot of investment because that's a limited character against a single target only, by the way. So you can already see that damage amplification-wise, Ren is pretty high up there. In fact, like I said, Nemu specifically supporting force character with poison, that's a lot of ifs and buts that probably aren't going to happen in most situations. Einstein needs to be Ascension 5. Halloween Mummy also needs to be Ascension 5 against a single target with Curse on. Ren seems to be the obvious choice as an all-rounder that works against most targets. Because even if you need to have the wound on the enemy once, if the wound drops after that, it's okay. And in fact, maybe the wound doesn't even need to be specifically on the enemy, because there just needs to be a wound somewhere on the enemy lineup, could be on any of the enemies. And then if, for example, you have area effect hits that hit all the enemies, that still gives Ren stacks, that still causes Ren to do her follow-up, and that still causes Ren to apply her debuffs. So it's actually kind of easy to get Ren debuffs on the enemy, even if you can't get wound on every single enemy. So it seems quite easy, and it's on up to 3 targets. So seems pretty nice. So yeah, damage amplification-wise, Ren is already looking pretty darn good. But so far, the fact that her damage amplification is really, really good doesn't make her overpowered, right? It doesn't mean that I needed to make this video just for that fact. Well, what else does she have? Well, she also has really, really high DPS. This is something that you don't expect, at least towards the beginning of the game's lifetime, from debuffers. Now they've released some more debuffers that have high damage output, but specifically towards the beginning, you didn't really think that a debuffer would be doing really, really high damage. And even with the other high DPS debuffers that came in, like Swimsuit Sayaka, who does a little bit more but has way less damage amplification, or Halloween Mummy, which has more amplification but has way less damage. How much damage does it then actually do? Well, you see her Ascension 2 gives her bonus stacks whenever an enemy with wound gets attacked. And if you do the maths, that means whenever you do a follow-up on Ren, the enemy gets hit and Ren drops down to 2 out of 5 magic stacks. Then someone's turn happens, someone of your characters gets their turn, they attack, there's another 2 stacks, you have to 4 again. Which means that, yeah, you only actually need 2 attacks after your follow-up attack to get back to another follow-up attack. So every 2 attacks, you get a follow-up attack. Every 2. That's pretty frequent. In fact, that's so frequent that if you factor in the fact that specials also count for this, that, for example, reflecting damage on the enemy also counts, that counterattacks also count for this, you get to a point where you realize you get a follow-up attack basically every single character turn. And here's something interesting. You can only get 1 follow-up attack for every character's turn. Let's say, for example, it's Homoda's turn or whatever, and then Homoda triggers Ren follow-up attack. If then Homura during her turn were to somehow get enough hits in for Ren to get up to 5 magic stacks, the follow-up attack wouldn't happen because you can only get 1 per turn. It would only happen when the next character's turn starts. So with Ren you can get up to, and in most cases you can do it, that you can get 1 follow-up attack per turn. How strong is the follow-up attack? Well, it's about as strong as a normal attack, but it hits in proximity, so it hits up to 3 targets. So imagine every single character getting their turn, even some enemies getting their turn if you have like counters and whatever. You just get a free Ren multi-hit normal attack, like against 3 target normal attack, that also is actually buffed because her EX Crystallis gives her bonus damage against wounded targets, which hopefully is everyone, and it also gives her a stacking attack percent buff whenever she gets a follow-up attack. So she actually gets a lot of attack, a lot of bonus damage, and she will just throw out these attacks every single character turn. That's a lot of damage that comes out, specifically when you also remember that she has a lot of damage amplification, and of course the damage amplification works for her as well. So no matter what team you put her on, she can at least count on her own damage amplification to just buff her damage already. And it comes out to the fact that, yeah, she actually does a crap ton of damage. Outside of attackers and maybe Swimsuit Sayaka, she's the highest DPS character in the game by a lot, by a far amount. In fact, if an enemy is weak to Void, she actually does more damage against that target than an attacker who is off element. Like let's say for example the enemy is only weak to Void and Water, and you have a cool Homura who is Dark type, then that cool Homura probably does less damage than your Ren, because Ren is on element. That is how big the damage coming out from Ren is, that you can basically play her like an attacker on Void weak enemies, specifically once she has Ascension 2, so she can get more stacks. Okay, is everything that I've just said already enough to say that she's a good character? Yeah, her damage amplification is among the best, and her damage is also really, really high. So can we already close the book here and say we've done our job, we've shown she does really high damage, we've shown she has really high damage amplification, therefore she does something better than most other characters, that means she's a good character. But that's not quite the end, because I also mentioned at the beginning of this video that a good character is also someone who does many different things really well, and that those things need to be important to matter, right? So let's get into that. So the way I wanted to approach this is to basically just show you what sort of bosses that Ren is actually really good against, because it turns out it's a lot. Now, of course, every single boss has their own elements that they are weak to, and for example, if they are weak to Void, of course, that benefits Ren more than if the enemy is not weak to Void, for example. But what I specifically wanted to get at is that every boss, of course, has its own gimmicks, its own mechanics. Maybe it has like ads, like other enemies that are on field that try to help the boss. And I wanted to take a look at what boss fights does Ren's mechanics counter, like the idea that you have all of this many follow-up attacks that happen all the time. How many bosses do you actually counter specifically with that? And I'm just going to go down the list now, right? So we're going to start in Nightmare mode first. We're going to start with Darkness Witch, weak to her because there's ads that you need to cleave, and Ren is really good at cleaving ads because you can just apply wound to the boss, let's say, for that, and then whenever anyone attacks the boss, even if you're just single target attacking the boss, you will repeatedly get follow-up attacks from Ren, which then hit the ads on the side. And because you hit the ads on the side, that means that the ads on the side both get debuffed and they get damaged by pretty decent damage. And ads don't usually have that much HP, so if you just have a breaker break them, you don't even need to worry about an attacker attacking them, because just when they get broken, they'll probably just die to follow-up attacks from Ren. Meaning that every single fight that has ads that you need to cleave, already Ren is really good against them, because you don't need to spend extra resources like extra SP to do that, to cleave all these ads. Because I didn't mention this before, but yes, Ren is SP positive, meaning that across an entire fight, you're generating more SP than you're using, because you need to only throw out one of your wounds on the enemy, and then you can just benefit off that wound for many, many turns afterwards, and you can just use your normal attack instead, because you don't actually gain that much more damage from using your skill when the enemy already has a wound on it. Sure, it's a little bit more damage, but not that much. So a normal attack is totally fine and just gives you a whole bunch of SP. So she's also really, really good at generating SP probably better at generating SP than almost every other buffer out there as well. So put that on there as well. So yeah, like I mentioned, Darkness Witch, Nightmare has ads, so ads get cleaved down. Desert Witch is weak to Void and also has ads that need to be cleaved down. Now, usually, like I said, the element of course means that a character that is on element, like that has the correct element, is always better than one that doesn't have the correct element. But specifically with Ren, I think that is doubly important. It's not just that she does a little bit more damage and that she takes a little bit less damage and all of that stuff, because we know that Ren can basically function as an attacker if the enemy is weak to Void, because she does so much damage. So, unlike most other characters in the game, Ren specifically becomes a lot more powerful when the enemy is weak to Void, because suddenly her damage goes really, really high, meaning every single Void weak enemy in the game can get DPS down by just Ren. But then you also have an attacker, like an actual attacker standing next to Ren anyway, because you're not taking up that space, right? Because even if the enemy wasn't Void weak, you might have a Ren, and then you still have that attacker there, right? So you don't have to give up an extra spot. You just now suddenly have a second attacker on the field, basically, if the enemy is Void weak, which is why I also want to specifically mention every single Void weak boss in the game. So yeah, Desert Witch is Void weak and has ads that get cleaved down. Box Witch, Void weak. Silver Witch is interesting because Silver Witch has a unique gimmick, which is that all of the boss's mechanics and all of the boss's attacks scale not with attack, but with defense. Which means that someone who can lower enemy defense also means that Silver Witch, for example, does less damage. And I think it also has a shield, and I think the barrier is dependent on defense as well. So all of the Silver Witch's mechanics get hard countered by lowering defense. Then does that, perfectly counters all of that. Shadow Witch has ads that need to be cleaved down. To be fair though, it's 4 ads, so you're not hitting all of them at once. But if you're gonna use AoE characters, as long as one enemy on the enemy side has wound, then if you use an AoE ability, you guarantee that you get stacks for Ren. So if you just have one wound on the enemy, you're always getting follow-up attacks, and every single follow-up attack is gonna hit at least 2 ads, or rather at most 2 ads actually. So it just helps a lot with DPS, even though she's not hitting all the ads at least. Mermaid Witch, her gimmick is hard countered by having an ailment on her, specifically a damage over time ailment, I think. Or no, it's actually just, anyway, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, so she gains a speed buff if she doesn't have an ailment. But if she does have an ailment, she doesn't get a speed buff. So just give her an ailment from Ren and she doesn't get a speed buff, and that hard counters her entire fight. Awesome. She's also a damage race, and of course having more damage and damage amp helps a lot. Artist Witch is weak to Void and has ads that need to be cleaved. Absolutely gets wrecked by Ren really hard. Sandbox Witch has ads that need to be cleaved down, but on top of that has stacks of shield that each get removed for every single tick of damage. Well, Ren is a character that has a lot of ticks of damage, because every single follow-up attack is a tick of damage. So every single character turn is not just that character hitting the boss, it's also Ren. So shields get stripped twice as fast if you have a Ren on the team. So every enemy that has shield stacks also gets absolutely destroyed by Ren. So yeah, Sandbox Witch absolutely gets destroyed by Ren. Commoner's Horse is a lot stronger if it doesn't have an ailment on it. So Ren gives an ailment on it, hard counters Commoner's Horse as well. Needle Witch is weak to Void. Awesome. Nameless AI has ads that need to be cleaved down. Also perfect for Ren. The Blessed Witch. Not that difficult, but the boss punishes your team the more buffs you have. But it doesn't punish debuffs. So you want to play debuff focused characters. So of course Ren is a #1 choice for debuff focused characters. Awesome. What else do we have? We have Scene 0 version of Walpurgisnacht, because that one has stacks of shield that you need to get rid of. But then, of course, once again, strips shields very easily. And then finally, we have Spindle Witch, which is Void weak. So far, Ren has been pretty good, but what about the really tough, difficult fights like Chaos or Tower? Well, let me tell you. In Chaos, here's some more witches or enemies that she's good against. The Rose Garden Witch is weak to Void, and the passive poison that the boss does with its like counter move is based on defense. So even though Ren triggers that poison very often, because she can't help herself and keeps attacking very often, and the poison comes out more often the more often you attack, which sounds like Ren hurts you, and in most cases it does, you can actually specifically play a strategy around reducing enemy defense, in which case Ren is extremely good, because she both does an insane amount of damage against the Rose Garden Witch while also weakening the poison that the Rose Garden Witch does, which makes this a very niche counter, but still a counter to Rose Garden if you use Ren correctly there. Then you have the Darkness Witch, which is weak to Void, and specifically the Darkness Witch gets weaker the more debuffs are on the enemy, and Ren applies up to 3 debuffs, 3 different debuffs, like 2 defense debuffs and then 1 damage taken debuff. So it's also absolutely the #1 perfect choice to counter Darkness Witch. Oh, great. Box Witch. So the Box Witch, like the attacks that it does are weakened if it has an ailment on it. So once again, an ailment helps perfectly. But on top of that, the boss also gets weakened the more often you critically strike the boss. And follow-up attacks can critically strike. So if you have someone that buffs your critical rate, every single character turn also gets the follow-up attack from Ren, also gets another crit, so you can crit up to twice per turn. Fantastic. Absolutely gets destroyed by Ren. Fucking, oh my god, it's so good. Silver Witch, weak to Void. But it's also similar to the Nightmare version Silver Witch, where all of its attacks and gimmicks are based around defense. So if you lower the boss's defense, all of its gimmicks, like the strength of its barrier, all of its attacks become so much weakened, and actually the boss cannot do anything with enough of those debuffs. Great, fantastic. The Shadow Witch, once again, is similar to Nightmare Witch, where you have to just cleave. Not that strong, but still pretty good. And then on top of all of that, you have the Artist Witch, which is weak to Void and has adds you need to cleave. And once again, Ren is the #1 choice for any boss that sounds somewhat similar to that. And somehow we're not even at the bosses that Ren counters the most. Tower, floor 15, Darkness, same as Nightmare, also gets countered. Shadow, level 20, same as Nightmare. Mermaid, level 30, same as Nightmare, gets countered by having an ailment on it. Artist, 35, is getting countered by cleaving. The adds, awesome. Sandbox on level 40 is adds you need to cleave, also perfectly gets countered by then. The Silver Witch on, no, wait a second, I'm skipping. The Commoner's Horse on level 45 is weak to Void, and its gimmicks is countered specifically by many follow-up attacks. Perfect #1 choice. And then the Desert Witch on level 50, also weak to Void, also gimmick countered by attacking often. In case you haven't noticed, by the way, that's like 5 bosses in a row, 6 bosses in a row that are counted all by specifically just Ren. Awesome. Silver Witch on floor 55. The gimmick is countered by number of debuffs and ailments. Guess who has many debuffs and ailments? It's Ren. Awesome. Oh my god. What else do we have? Also, yeah, all of the enemies and the boss are also based on defense. So once again, Silver Witch is a victim for Ren. Fantastic. Nameless AI on floor 65. Weak to Void and has adds that need to be cleaved. It's like 80% of all tower bosses get hard countered by Ren. Because they get weakened by debuffs, or they get weakened by ailments, or they need many follow-up attacks, or they need just many attacks, or they are weak to Void, or they have adds that need to be cleaved. In every single one of those instances, Ren is like the #1 choice. It's not just that she's good, it's that she's fantastic in those instances. And you know what happened? The developers have realized this. The developers have realized that this is kind of an issue. So there's one Chaos boss that I haven't mentioned that is weak to Void, but I didn't write down that Ren would be good for this, even though the boss also has shields that need to be stripped as fast as possible. So you think, wait a second, Void weak and shields need to be destroyed? Why is Ren not good against that one? Because the developers specifically gave that boss 100% wound immunity. Because the developers know at this point that Ren has become a problem. So because the developers know that Ren has become a problem, they've now given 100% wound assist to the Chaos Sandbox Witch. Gets worse. The Score Attack Witch that they've just released, the Witch Charlotte, like the Desert Witch, the Double Witch, is also 100% immune to wound. Because that boss gets weakened by having more ailments on it, and they really didn't want you to use Ren because you're already using Ren on all of these other bosses, so please use other ailments, is what they're telling you, right? All these other bosses that were weakened by ailments didn't specifically have 100% wound resistance, but this time they do, because they know that you're just using Ren for all of those ailment bosses. Okay, so most bosses in this game have some or multiple parts to them that get hard countered by Ren's kit, even though the kit seemed so simple. Yet somehow follow-up attacks and ailments and debuffs and many attacks and all of that and crits, all of that counters so much of these bosses. Well, it also synergizes really well with your own characters. So here's another list. Here's the list of characters that either benefit Ren or that Ren benefits. And I'm not gonna just mention all of the characters that can hit multiple enemies. Like, of course, if someone on your team can hit multiple enemies, that makes it easier to hit a target that has wound on it, right? For more stacks. But I'm still gonna mention like the characters that are priority area of effect characters, like Oriko, for example, right? But let's just go over the list and see who actually synergizes really well with Ren. And the list is also, once again, like 80% of all the characters. So let's just start. You have Kirika. Kirika's Reflect from a barrier gives Ren stacks. Fantastic, which means that every single time an enemy attacks, that's 3 stacks for Ren. Oriko is primarily AoE, which means 3 stacks for Ren. If just any enemy has wound, because it doesn't matter who you're targeting, you're guaranteed to get stacks. Awesome. Now, theoretically, Ren also has insanely good synergy with herself, but right now you can't put 2 Rens on the battlefield. But if you could, she has absurd synergy with herself. That would actually be even more broken than you would think. Felicia. Her passive and her EX Crystallis specifically trigger only when a debuff is on the enemy. Now, of course, you can apply one herself with her special, but if she's not Ascension 2, for example, then she can't apply it with her regular attack. She can only apply it with her special. But with Ren, you're basically always going to have a debuff on the enemy, so you're always going to have Felicia's passive. Fantastic. Yachio gains MP whenever you crit, which counts follow-up attack crits. Fantastic. Which means free MP for Yachio for just having a Ren on the team that crits a bunch. And you're going to be critting a bunch because you're going to have a crit buffer on the team if you play Yachio. Fantastic. Cool Homura. It's not that strong, but whenever Cool Homura gets a follow-up attack or gives herself more turns, all of those turns gain more stacks for Ren, of course. So more stacks for Ren. Fantastic. Pluvia's AoE. Mami is AoE on her skill and has another kind of synergy because she has a lot more speed for the party and gives more turns to the party. And giving more turns to the party means more attacks, and the more attacks the party gets, the more follow-up attacks your party gets. So yeah, giving more turns to your party, even if Ren herself doesn't get more turns. Like, let's say, for example, Ren is really, really slow and she doesn't get any turns or whatever. It doesn't matter because she just passively does it. Even if someone else is fast, she still gets more follow-up attacks. Awesome. Kyoko has a synergy with Ren. Why? Because Kyoko wants enemies to have high break bonus, and you might have to get that break multiplier up first. And something that I didn't mention is that getting many follow-up attacks also means every single follow-up attack increases the enemy break multiplier by quite a lot, actually, meaning Ren is also one of the fastest break multiplier increasers in the game, maybe even the fastest, right? Everyone else can only increase the break multiplier, like breakers, when they get a turn, right? A breaker needs to get a turn to increase the break multiplier really high. But Ren just gets a follow-up attack every single character turn for like another 12% multiplier on the break bar. So the break multiplier actually fills up really, really high, really, really fast if a Ren is on the team. So you're going to be at a maximum break percentage this fast. So yeah, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So Kyoko, who needs high break multipliers, immediately gets there with Ren, if the boss can even go that high, that is. Sayaka, her counter gives Ren stacks, fantastic. Muamura gives more turns, and more turns means more stacks, fantastic. Mabayu gives more turns to one character, and even if that character isn't Ren, which you're probably not going to give a bonus turn to Ren, but if you use Mabayu on any other character, that character taking more turns means more stacks for Ren, more follow-up attacks, nice. Both Tsukasa and Tsukuyo are both AoE, and both of these have passives that get stronger the more debuffs are on the enemy. Once again, we have more debuffs, nice. For, like, Ren triggers more debuffs and helps these characters out, fantastic. Toka, she grants herself a passive buff to her speed whenever anyone on the party has a follow-up attack, which means her passive is going to be stacked to maximum all the time. And of course, she also does a follow-up attack herself for bonus stacks. Nemu has a follow-up attack on her special, which isn't very often, but that follow-up attack also generates extra stacks. Awesome. Alina is AoE, and she gains passive magic stacks whenever anyone on the team does a follow-up attack. So 3 stacks for Alina. And on the other hand, the more follow-up attacks that Alina does, because she does a follow-up attack every single turn, that's also extra stacks for Ren, so they give each other stacks. Nice, that's a good synergy where they will both give each other more stacks. Simsutsuka is primarily AoE, and Ren's follow-up attacks trigger Vortex very fast, so if you need to trigger Vortex very fast, Ren can do it almost immediately. Fantastic. Holy Mami is primarily AoE. Ui has some very interesting synergies. So on one hand, she passively buffs follow-up attack damage on the team. That's perfect for Ren. But she also gains bonus attacks with her ultimate. So her ultimate makes it so that while her ultimate is active, she does bonus attacks whenever anyone else does an attack, right? But those bonus instances of attacks also happen on Ren's follow-up attacks. So Ren's follow-up attacks also gain the bonus attacks from Ui, which I think also, by the way, makes Ren the best driver for the bonus hits from Ui. So if you ever wanted to do an Ui team where you specifically make Ui deal damage with her bonus ticks of damage, Ren is the #1 choice for that, once again. Are you tired yet of Ren being the #1 choice for most bosses and most allies in the game? Gets better, because that's not all that Ren and Ui do for each other. Because Ui gains MP whenever anyone on the team deals damage. Whenever anyone deals damage, which includes the damage from a follow-up attack. Oh my god, isn't that great? Well, here's another one, Sakurako. She's primarily AoE, which helps getting stacks for Ren, but on top of that, well, you see, she gains more magic stacks whenever anyone on the team crits or does a follow-up attack. Now, a critting follow-up attack doesn't give her 2 stacks, but yeah, she also gains more stuff for follow-up attacks, so Ren gives her more stacks all the time. Fantastic. On top of that, also, Sakurako herself does follow-up attacks, and those follow-up attacks are AoE and are guaranteed to give a stack to Ren. Nice. She also synergizes with Mitama, because Mitama's passive damage reduction is only active when there's an debuff on the enemy, which in most cases will be Mitama applying the debuff herself, but with Ren she doesn't have to apply a debuff herself, she can just let Ren apply a debuff, and then her passive is already active. Nice. And then she also has a absolutely broken synergy, by the way, with Mifuyu. So Mifuyu gains both magic stacks and a lot of MP, whenever anyone on the team crits. So if your Ren has a high crit chance, let's say for example, generally with a Mifuyu, you want to have high crit rate on the team because Mifuyu wants high crit rate on the team. So your Ren, every single time you get a follow-up attack, is more magic stacks and MP for Mifuyu. So let's say for example you have a Tsuruno, gives the buff. Tsuruno attacks, the enemy crits. That's both MP and magic stacks for Mifuyu. But then also the Ren follow-up attack happens. And then the Ren follow-up attacks also gives a magic stack and MP to Mifuyu. You get 2 stacks of magic and twice the MP for every single character turn, which once again makes Ren the #1 choice of ally for Mifuyu. You're still not gonna get tired of Ren being the #1 best character for basically everyone in the game against almost every boss in the game. Now, Alina, like Halloween Alina hasn't released yet, but if Halloween Alina also benefits off of ailments being on the enemy, which I assume she does, that she benefits on ailments being on the target, I guess it's going to be one of her best choices. Yeah, of course it's going to be that. Of course it's going to be up there. So yeah, she's kind of great at everything. Not only is her damage amp extremely high, not only is her damage amongst the non-attackers one of the highest in the game, she's also SP positive. Like, she only needs to use 1 SP and then maybe none for the entire rest of the fight, and then generates SP. She gets the break bar really high. She has so many different types of mechanics and so many hits that she does that she automatically counters most boss mechanics in the game, that she synergizes so well with everyone in the game. Is there anything that she can't do? Well, what if the boss is immune to wound, like has 100% wound resist? That kind of sucks. Well, if the enemy only has high resistance, well, her Ascension 2 gives her 80% ailment hit rate, which, by the way, is like, the way this works, if the enemy has 80% resistance to wound, that means your chance to wound is 20%. And then it takes the 20% and then multiplies it with the 80%, which is like 38% or something, like 36% or something? Not quite sure. But yeah, that's basically how that works, which means that even if the enemy is like 60% wound resist, still means that you're gonna hit like 70% of the time of your wound, so that's good enough, especially because, guess what, even if the enemy has like 80% wound resist and you have your Ascension 2 and you only have like a 30% chance to hit the wound, your wound hits potentially 3 targets, and you only need to hit it on 1 target. Because if you have multi-hit or you just target that enemy, you're still getting all of your stacks. So even if the enemy has 80% wound resist, it still in most cases doesn't actually counter Ren, which yes is kind of insane. So the enemy needs to be full stop immune to wound, and then Ren actually loses most of what makes her good. So wound resist, like 100% wound resist, would be one way that Ren can't do anything. Okay, that's one weakness that Ren has. There is theoretically a second weakness that she has, which is that there are some small instances, like some bosses, very, very few bosses, where you don't actually want to attack very often. For example, there is the Dog Witch on Chaos, which actually does a counter against you if you attack the wrong target at the wrong time. So it applies like an ailment on you, and then when you have an ailment on you, you have to attack this target, but not this target, otherwise you get countered, etc., etc. And in that situation, Ren would just keep attacking and would just cause a counter every single turn, and you would just die instantly on turn 1. So that's kind of sad. But outside of those very few instances where there are bosses that actually punish you for doing many attacks, or for hitting AoE, which, like I said, are kind of rare, that's the only 2 weaknesses she has. Like bosses like that, which just don't play her on those bosses, or the enemy having 100% wound resist. In every single other case, Ren is either a great choice or the #1 best choice. Now, I've said all of this, and I hope that I was able to convince you so far that Ren is maybe an absolutely fantastic, not just fantastic, but one of the best, if not the best character in the entire game. But I know that you've also been shouting at me this entire time, yeah, I know Ren is good, but isn't Pluvia Madoka better? Here's the thing about Pluvia Madoka. First off, I don't think she's the best character in the game anymore. I think that time has passed. Why do I think that? Well, she's a breaker, and the breakers primarily break enemies, but unlike Ren, who has still among the some of the highest damage amplification, or some of the easiest to get damage amplification in the entire game, Pluvia's break speed is really slow, actually, compared to most other characters, right? Like most other characters, specifically single target characters, break way faster, right? Mifuyu breaks like twice as fast, like actually twice as fast, if not faster than Pluvia. I think Mel also breaks like twice as fast as Pluvia, or some insane number like that. Like there are characters right now that break so much faster than Pluvia that you might actually want to give up on the MP restoration that Pluvia gives you, because you just break that much faster, right? So Pluvia has fallen off just by virtue of there being breakers that break so much faster, right? But it gets worse, because the main reason why Pluvia Madoka is so good is because of her MP restoration to the entire party, right? You want to restore a lot of MP, and MP restoration is really, really good. But as it turns out, on one hand, other breakers have come in that also have really strong utility. Like MP restoration is really strong utility. But for example, Mifuyu gives you like 15% bonus crit rate against the enemy, which is pretty darn good. But on top of all of that, how important MP restoration is, well, it's flat MP restoration, so it's actually not as important if someone has high MP cost. For example, Mel has really high MP cost. Now I know Mel is also a breaker, but just as an example, or the Void Bow Homura, the limited Void Bow Homura has really high MP cost. And this is offset by the fact that she gives herself a lot of bonus MP, right? But that means that Pluvia Madoka is actually really bad for Void Bow Homura, because the little bit of MP restoration that you get from Pluvia doesn't actually do that much, because her MP cost is so high. Like you get like 20 MP from Pluvia, hers costs like 150 MP. That does so little, what? And then you also have other characters that have special mechanics where they give themselves more MP. Like Mifuyu, once again, is also another breaker, but Mifuyu gains bonus MP whenever anyone on the party crits. So you don't need a Pluvia. Like, you don't need a Pluvia to give her MP. She can give herself MP, right? So there they are releasing breakers that break much faster or that have other crazy utility that is really good, or they are releasing characters that have higher MP costs or that have other ways of gaining MP. So the actual usability of a breaker that breaks somewhat slow actually, but has high MP restoration, is slowly getting lower and lower. Like, it's becoming less and less relevant to have a Pluvia, because now you have so many other great choices or teams where she doesn't even fit in that well. Not to mention that you're not going to play Pluvia in most cases against targets that aren't weak to light. Now then you can still play against a target that isn't void weak. It might be a little bit harder to apply the wound, but her damage amplification is still really high. And her damage is still decently high. Maybe not that high, but still decently high for a debuffer at least. So Ren is still going to give you most of that. And also all of those synergies, all of those like gimmicks from the bosses that get countered by Ren, all of this still remains, even if she's not on element, right? Ren doesn't have to be an element. It makes only her damage better, and it makes it easier, but not required, to apply wound, right? So if you don't care about her damage that much, or if you're okay with her having a little bit less damage, then her being off element doesn't matter that much. But Pluvia being off element means you break really, really slow. Like, Pluvia off element breaks really, really slow, like absurdly slow, compared to another breaker that maybe is single target, that maybe is on element, so you probably are going to use that breaker instead. So Pluvia has dropped and dropped and dropped in relevance. Kilika has also dropped in relevance, simply because it's not as difficult anymore to just survive against enemies. And while Kilika is still extremely powerful with the fact that she synergizes also really well with a lot of other characters, like she also has really high number of synergies, it's not as important anymore for your defender to have that many crazy utility points or to be that great at protecting the party, because other sustains can keep the party alive, and other sustains, like some healers, have also really good utility as well. So Kilika has also dropped in relevance as well. But then Ren's relevance isn't dropping. Ren's relevance is going up, because they are releasing more and more bosses, like basically every boss in tower, that is hard countered by Ren. And it's actually, if you look at all of this from the perspective of the developers, it's really hard to develop a boss that doesn't accidentally get countered by Ren. And it's also really hard to develop characters that don't accidentally have way too good synergy with Ren, right? So the developers have to really work around the fact that Ren exists in the way that she does, and I think they have way overtuned Ren. They should not have allowed her to get this many follow-up attacks. Her A2 giving an extra magic stack, I think that singular part made her way too good. And now we're in this situation where they can't nerf her, because now I know legally you can actually legally nerf characters in a gacha game. It's not against the law or anything. It's just that if you do, everyone's getting their pitchforks out and is gonna be really, really angry. And you're going to lose a lot of players, and you're going to lose whales if you do that. So no one wants to do that. No gacha developer wants to nerf characters, because it makes everyone really angry. But if you can't do that, I guess they just have to never ever release another character ever again that applies wound, and then just give every single boss in the game 100% wound resistance. Because other than doing that, short of doing that, I don't see Ren dropping off anytime soon. In fact, the more characters and bosses they release, almost like most of those that are going to be released, most of those are going to have some crazy synergy or going to get countered by Ren. It's not going to stop. Ren's relevance is only going up, I fear. So yeah, maybe the developers have put themselves in a tough corner, or maybe this is just a prelude to some absolutely insanely busted debuffers in the future. This was a really long video, but it was mostly just me rambling about why Ren is probably too good for the game now at this point, and why this is kind of a problem maybe for the developers. But yeah, that was it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time. Also remember to become a member today, and shoutouts to my members, Chai Bean, Rip van Winkel, and Simpletor. Thank you very much.